This is Zander. Sorry, hate this podcast.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Dennis Zander was one of the founding partners of the software publishing company Artworx. He programmed a number of games and educational titles, including Hazard Run, Rings of the Empire, Monkeymath, Giant Slalom, Intruder Alert, Monkeynews, and others. He collaborated with Roger Harnish on Artworx's popular strip poker game. This interview took place on June 13, 2019. In it, we discuss Art Walsh, whom I previously interviewed.
As a junior in high school, and let's see, I graduated in high school in 1961, so it was about 1959, I took a summer science training program at Ohio University. At the time, I was living in Parma, just outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And so went to Ohio University, and the summer camp, which was 6 weeks long, as I recall, had different modules or different types of classes you could take. And one of them was computer programming. And so I wound up programming a computer at the very lowest level. We had to tell it how to add, much less how to multiply. And programs were stored on paper tape and on a magnetic drum. So it was a very rudimentary, very basic computer, but the university did have it, and we were able to program it, as I say, at the very basic level in binary. And so that was kind of my first experience with that, and then went to Miami of Ohio and was in the physics department, majored in physics. But in the basics of the physics department was a IBM 1620 scientific computer, which they would pay juniors and seniors to kind of run programs for other people. So we would take IBM punch cards, load them into the computer, let the programs run, and then we would print out the results and have that available for the people that had written programs that we were running for them. Mm-hmm. But as part of that, a friend of mine and I got to sit at the computer console and play with it and program it in various ways. And I was programming it to learn paired associates, and my good friend was programming it to try to get it to play chess, which is, of course, a favorite thing for a lot of people to try to teach a computer to do. And so that was my second and probably major early experience. And we were learning Fortran while doing that, and we were also learning machine language as well on the 1620. So not much on any contact with computers after that. Went to work for the university for a while, University of Illinois, where I did my graduate work in electrical engineering, and didn't have any contact with computers there. But then, as children were born, needed to get more income, and left the university to go to work for Eastman Kodak. As an engineer at Eastman Kodak, I wound up learning to program microprocessors and redesign the control system and complete programming for an inkjet printer. I'd gotten Kodak into inkjet printing to identify product as it was going down the line, and we were printing information on various product. But we did two things. Got Kodak to make the ink for the printers, because the ink had to be non-photoactive, which was a unique characteristic that most inkjet manufacturers wouldn't care about, but Kodak certainly did. And so having a bunch of really good scientists and chemists, they were able to do that, which also saved them money on very expensive ink. But nonetheless, I did the application of reprogramming those printers, and even got them to print barcode and things like that, which the manufacturer didn't have. And ultimately, they licensed back the boards and software that I had created as part of the work at Kodak. Then, while later on at my years at Kodak, wound up getting into, actually, while at Kodak, I should say, because I had that interest in programming, and you started getting to the point where you could finally afford to buy things like an Atari 800, and then ultimately the next generation Atari, what was it? I forget what the second generation was.
One of the XLs.
Yeah, one of the big ones, if you will, that Atari did, the 1000 or whatever. I forget the number. 1200
XL probably. That was the big one.
Right. Yeah, that one. But started on the 800, and first started playing games and things like that. But at work at Kodak, we had access to the Great Cave Mystery software program. That you would play that and try to figure out how to get into the cave.
Mm-hmm.
And that and some games that rudimentary games that were text-based, even a skiing game, and I said, oh gee, I think I could create that on the Atari to do that kind of thing, So the first one was like a Grand Slalom downhill skiing kind of game, and that was kind of interesting. And then I created a couple of other ones, and ultimately, having done a few of those, including Intruder Alert, went to Art Walsh at Dynacomp, which was the first company he was involved in that did publishing of software, and said, gee, would you be interested in any of the things that I've done? And he took a look at them and decided, yeah, they would be interested, and they decided they would be willing to publish them. So that sort of got my foot into the whole idea of creating games and writing software for computers for the creation of games.
Did you know Art going in, or was it just cold call him? Or
no, I just I saw that there was a local company that did that sort of thing, and I took my chances to go and see them and show them what I had. And so that was my first exposure to art, and then from there, ultimately he left Dynacomp and started Artworx with myself and Doug McFarland.
Mm-hmm. And you were one of the three founders of
yes, of
Artworx, right?
Yeah, right. And then as part of Artworx, we started doing other than what I would say are the text-based programs like Intruder Alert and that sort of thing. I started doing things like the Draw Pick program because I was frustrated with software that would let me create characters that you might use for games in the Atari and other scenes that you might like to have for graphics and things like that. I did Hazard Run and that sort of thing, where you needed a little more graphic capability, and as opposed to the text-based games like Intruder Alert. So, one of the funny things from my standpoint was that later on, in probably after I guess the experience at Artwork, I got notes from people that indicated how much they liked Intruder Alert because it was written such that anybody could access the program itself and see what I had done, and they found it very instructive, which I thought was interesting. I never appreciated the fact that somebody would be learning something from software that I had written. That was a surprise, pleasant one, of course. So that was interesting.
Yeah, you think you're publishing this game just for people to play, and if all of a sudden people are learning from it to make their own creations, that's a whole other direction, isn't it?
Yeah, that was kind of cool in a way. So but of course when we got to the let's say games which we had put a lot more energy into, or time in particular, like Hazard Run, of course, you're writing. I was one of the few ones that I did in machine language for the Atari, and with a lot of help from Doug, because he had access to people that knew a lot about the innards and programming of the Atari. And so that was another case where it was great to have somebody else to work with who had other contacts in the Atari organization, as a matter of fact, or other people that had written significant things for the Atari, where you could learn about the machine and about its innards and how it operated, so that you could make use of that in creating our own programs, for Artworx for publication. And Hazard Run was done actually for my son Brian, who loved the Dukes of Hazzard, as it were. And so I decided I would try to create a game that kind of emulated some of that action in play. And the fun part was that thinking beyond just a game, thinking about creating a module that would let you go and create your own screens, so that you even though you may have played the versions that were included when you bought the game, you weren't limited to that. You could go and create a different run, if you will, and have different obstacles and different paths that you would have to follow and in order to complete the run, if you will. So I thought that was kind of a neat thing to be able to offer as part of the package that people were getting.
Yeah. So you created the game because your son was into the show.
Yep.
About how old was he at the time? I mean, little or
about 6.
Yeah. And did he enjoy the game?
Yeah, he enjoyed it very, very much. And in fact, the deal I had worked is that one of the previous games my older son got the royalties to, and I think that may have been Intruder Alert or something like that. And then when I did Hazard Run, Brian got the royalties from that game. So then I was on the hook, unfortunately, to try to think up something for my daughter, who was in the middle between the two. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is trying to find a game that you know would appeal to girls at that point in time was a real challenge, because certainly it wasn't obvious, what would work, if you will, with girls. And I think part of that was mentally constraining oneself to what you think girls would like. Even though I had a daughter that I could ask, that wasn't a great deal of help. And so I never did ultimately come up with something that was successful for that. Did subsequently, however, wind up doing a number of educational games, because my wife is a teacher, and I had a good friend that was also a teacher, and he was into game creation. And so when I first did things like Monkeymath, which was an animation of learning to do simple mathematics with a monkey character, gorilla character that would just help with some animation. It didn't really help with the math, but it helped with the presentation of problems and selecting answers and things like that. And that was pretty good. And then did a reading program that I had worked with, and ultimately a more advanced program, which was not done for Artworx. It was done subsequently for just general publication, and that was done as a, what do we call it? We call it Astrobot Academy, and that was a pretty interesting program. It did.
What was it called? Astrobot Academy?
Astrobot Academy. It had a heuristic learning approach to it. So as the student would work on the problems and answer the questions, they would the computer would keep track of that. And if they didn't get above an 80% on a class of problems, it would give them that, a new set of problems, but repeat the set and repeat the problems that they had gotten wrong. And when they finally got above 80%, then they could advance to the next level of problems. And so this all was worked out with this educator that I worked with, and was a pretty successful program. But it was the sort of thing that was advertised on the net and sold to people, and then it had a security lock on it, and then when they bought it, we would send them the unlock number, I should say, which was another interesting aspect to learn about, is how do you try to protect something, and how successful are you in doing that.
Mm-hmm.
What we actually did is we had a high school student that he knew that was really pretty into computers and maybe breaking codes and things like that, and we gave the program to him and let us spend a couple of weeks trying to break it open so that it could be copied. And he wasn't able to do that, so we felt pretty good about, just putting it out there. What would happen is you would provide the program to people, and they could try it out and see what it looked like, see kind of what it did. But to really use the entire capability of the software, you'd have to buy it. And so that was an interesting approach to quote, publishing online, and we thought that was kind of neat. But and that sort of about that time, and having gotten through the Artworx stuff with things, Art was always doing his bridge programs and still does, as far as I know. And then he and Doug and I came up with the idea for strip poker at Artworx, which was a big program for us, at least, and was copied extensively as far as I know. And Doug started doing I did a lot of the software for it. Doug did, initially, all of the graphics were drawn graphics. And of course, how shall I say, the computers got better, with the bigger, faster Atari and other computers.
Sure.
You could have greater graphics capability, and eventually got to the point where we were taking photographs of actual models and using that in the software in the program as it was offered. And then having an interesting part of the program, I think, was the idea of having a character, of course, to the person you were playing against in strip poker, where they would offer comments about your play and betting and various things like that. And so, and the capabilities, because Art had some background in that, how you might affect the quality of the play of your opponent on the game. Were they aggressive and would they in their betting, or would they bluff, and things like that, that we built into the program as kind of aspect of the play. And so I thought that program was from a program standpoint, was pretty good. As it got to the more advanced graphics standpoint, I became, how shall I say, less comfortable with it. I was happier with it when Doug was doing all of the Vargas girl type drawings, for the images, because I thought it was a more artistic kind of offering. Although it's still the aspect of strip poker. You're not getting away from that, and yet even later on, the idea was, well, we won't just have it be female models; we'll have male models as well. So that you presumably are offering, although you offer more female models than male models, just because of the distribution of, who buys what in software.
Sure. Did anybody buy the male model disc?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell you whether it was males or females buying it.
Sure.
In all honesty, but yeah, that was clearly not as popular as the female models, but nonetheless, it was a seller, and so it was worth doing, shall we say? So For all I know, it was guys buying it for their girlfriends.
Sure.
But nonetheless, yeah. And that was sort of as far as I think. There were a few programs after that I did, as part of the effort with Artworx. In some cases it was somebody had done a program on one computer and we would adapt it for another computer.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing some of that, which sometimes is a challenge because, you're given. It's one thing to create a program by yourself, where you have the constraints and decide what is going to be done and what's not going to be done. And then the interesting thing is when you're handed basically a complete package that somebody, let's say, has done on the IBM PC, and you want to adopt it to the Atari, which is typically the kind of thing that I would be given to do, like a horse racing program, which is one of the ones that we did. That was a pretty extensive offering on the PC, in that it had racing forums and all the information on jockeys and horses and all that kind of thing that had to be incorporated, and then a simulated race that was done. And, of course, doing the graphics and all that kind of part was something I was always fairly good at. And so that was part of what I would bring to the moving it to the Atari, in addition to having to duplicate the game code. So, and it was pretty interesting for a long time until you kind of got to the point where you realized that even though it could be a team between me and Doug and maybe Art, that didn't match up to what was being done in the marketplace, with the big corporations, which would have a team of people working on graphics and a different team of people working on gameplay and, and that whole thing. So it was clear that we weren't going to match up to that with our small organization that hadn't managed to grow into a bigger. It started out that Art was mostly a person who was looking for software that he could market and pay royalties on. And even treated Doug and me pretty much the same way, even though we were members of the corporation.
So did you make any money off this stuff?
Well, yeah, I would say, making a fair amount of money off of royalties as the games were published. The harder part was, even though Art was, placing ads in magazines initially and that sort of thing, it was very difficult to get into distribution, where you'd make some real serious money when it finally, would be placed in game stores and computer stores that were at that point in time selling a lot of software, unlike sort of today's thing. And so, and then at the very end, when basically got down to the point where I think neither Doug nor I was interested in sort of continuing, Art wound up buying us both out, and so, you got a few $1,000s for that. So it wasn't huge, certainly not, what you might have heard other people being, rewarded for their efforts, either with royalties or other aspects of payment in software.
Did you typically work from the Artworx office, or did you do your programming from home, or what?
Yeah, mostly it was from home. At the office, Art had he and his wife handling communications and sales and inventory and things like that. And so it was set up to ship things and to sell things and to communicate with various either authors or places to try to sell or place product. That was kind of Art's and his wife's function. And Doug and I both worked from home, and either individually or together. I go over to his place, or he'd come over to mine, and we'd work on an issue when we're working on something together. But there was a lot of individual work, as it were, that you'd spend time into the late hours working on, because obviously daytime jobs still brought in the bread to feed the family.
Sure.
and the other was more fun money than anything.
Do you remember any particular challenges that you had while programming games, a particular sticking point or anything like that?
Well, yeah, sort of. I mean, if you were to look at the Atari itself, one of the issues, would be exactly how do sprites work. The first realization was what's a sprite, and how is Atari handling that in the hardware. And so one of the tricky things there was there wasn't a lot of information published about that, and yet there was information available, but you had to have access to that source, because initially, at least, there weren't published information that would tell you a lot about that and how to make them work and how to make them move and what their limitations were. So, and then, of course, once you learned about that, what is a sprite? What are the limitations of a sprite? How many pixels can it be? And that sort of thing. And then screen situations, how many backgrounds can you have in the computer that are sort of up and active that you can switch between? Those kinds of things. It mostly wound up being a learning issue for both me and Doug. But once you got enough experience playing with it and other tools became available, then that became a lot easier and a lot more fun to do and to work with. So that from a hardware learning standpoint, I guess that was one hurdle. Excuse me. The other part is sort of not so much hardware per se, but the interesting problem you get into when you're in a business like Artworx is what direction should your product take? And so there were a lot of nighttime discussions about that sort of thing in a business. Should we be focusing more on adult games? Should we be focusing more on playtime and what age level or personality type? Should you be working on educational software? What's the value of that? That was always kind of an interesting conundrum, I guess I would say. Not having, or certainly trying to find research information where you can get it in terms of, where's the market going and that sort of thing. And of course, part of the, I guess I would say, dismay of learning where the market is going is whether or not you have the capability to match that, so that you would actually have software that would compete in the marketplace. Because you can see that if you don't, then you're at the end of your rope.
Sure. My dad and I had a pirated copy of Hazard Run and also the strip poker. I played a lot of Hazard Run, and thank you. I apologize for stealing your game.
I do understand. It happens all the time. What was interesting, by the way, what's interesting to me is someone from, I think it was Great Britain, reached out to me and wrote an article about Artworx, and come to find out that even as early as, I think, or late, I should say, as last year, somebody had come up with simulations of the cartridge for the Atari and the Atari itself that you could run on a PC. So
sure.
People are now running those old programs on PCs, which just blew my mind away that was something that somebody would spend the energy to do. I can appreciate for some of the classic Atari games, of course.
Yeah, there's a lot of great, actually several great emulators for Mac and PC, and it really lowers the bar to almost nothing. To want to play Hazard Run? Sure, download it. You can have it up in 5 minutes. It's pretty cool.
Right.
Yeah.
In fact, it's something I would consider.
Sure. I can point you just to what to use when we're done, if you like.
Yeah, drop me an email for that if you would. I appreciate that.
Sure. I have a list of games here, and some of which we've talked about, some of which we haven't, and maybe I can go down the list, and if anything comes to mind, you have a story or anything, or you might just have nothing. So this is in alphabetical order, not in a very good order. The first one is Giant Slalom, which I think you said was your first game.
Yeah, as I recall, it was. And it was.
And that was the idea was kind of based from the mainframe.
Yeah, right.
Game.
There was a game. I think the DEC computers. We had access to at Kodak computers that would run that, and I think it was DEC or somebody had written one for that, and so I thought that was an interesting one that you could do, and it wouldn't be too hard to do. And then I tried to find ways, of course, to improve what I was doing relative to what I had seen previously, rather than just doing a straight up, flat out copy of it.
Next up is Hazard Run. So Hazard Run, I assume, was not like a licensed property.
Well, licensed in which sense do you mean?
Like from the Dukes of Hazzard people?
No. And so, it
because you spelt hazard with only one Z, not two.
Yeah, we're conscious of not running against anybody's registered trademarks, if you will, and yet wanting to let people know that it's that source, that base, And I don't know if they had copyrighted a orange car with a Confederate flag on top or not. With a number 1 on the side, but we certainly made use of that, but it was not a registered copy or anything like that.
But you never got any feedback from them?
No, none.
That's good. It's probably for the best.
Yeah. Too small for them to worry about, I think. I don't know. So
sure. Next on my list is Intruder Alert.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one actually preceded the Dukes of Hazzard. Hazard Run. Freudian slip there. That one obviously was based on the Star Wars whole thing, and our kids had gotten into that when we first saw the movie. It blew my mind because up till then I'd been going to movies and seeing movies, but in fact that night that we went to see it, I took one of my kids, or maybe the 2 boys, and we saw it and it just blew our mind away. And so I had convinced my wife she had to go see it with us. And so we went back and saw it again. In total, we saw it 6 times in the theaters with various family members and things like that. And so it became a real big thing for our family and got an early... I copied a version of Star Wars that we had on beta tape, and my son would run the beta machine and stop it and freeze frame an image, and then he would draw things from it. And so he was doing that constantly. That was my younger son, Brian. And so that became a real thing. And from my standpoint personally, it had kind of changed what was happening at the movies in such a significant way that is, blew our minds away in terms of what was now capable and what could be done. And Lucas certainly deserves tremendous accolades for doing what he did. And so, of course, that said, can we create something that replays or lets you re-engage with something that was like that, and unfortunately at that point in time, not having as good a familiarity with the graphics capability as was really available, and so wound up doing essentially another character-based, for the most part, game that had, as I recall, the one thing you could do is reconstruct, how shall I put it, when you had the character set that would be put on the screen, instead of typing the actual alphabetic characters, you could go in and modify the shapes that you had. And so you could basically just create a new character set, which could then be used as characters in a game, which is what was done for Intruder Alert. And there again, having different screen problems to solve became a puzzle-type solving thing that you would have to do to get from wherever you were to, quote, the Millennium Falcon and have it get on and escape successfully. So I think it was kind of an interesting concept game that was still relatively simple, but people enjoyed playing, I gather.
Mm-hmm. Next on my list is Monkeymath.
It's one of the ones I had mentioned that our effort into an educational program using graphics that I thought would get kids, involved in learning their math, basic math tables, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division kind of thing. And it was fun to create from my standpoint, and I hope some kids got fun playing it.
Next is Monkeynews.
Yes, that was the reading program, which somebody had kind of considered a game possibility, and then I wound up putting all the graphics in place for it to create that. And it was an effort to help kids in reading to learn. Learning to read, that's what I meant to say.
Sure. Rings of the Empire.
Yeah, that was one of the basic early ones that I had done. And it was based on a popular video game type thing that I thought we could do, and made some simple use of graphics on the Atari, and was sort of a ripoff. But it was one of those things where you're learning to spread your wings by creating something that is kind of popular, and that if you create it, maybe it'll be of interest to people.
Sure. You had a shareware game called Spy Hotel.
Yes. That was something that I did I started working on it and kind of for fun. I thought it would be kind of neat. The concept kind of appealed to me, that you would have this character show up, and then you'd have to decide, is it a spy, or is it a good person kind of thing, and do a quick draw kind of thing to decide whether to shoot or not, sort of thing. I don't know. It was just sort of a thing I did for fun, and so that's why I wound up being a shareware kind of thing. I'm surprised that even people knew about it.
Well, the one that I couldn't find anything online about. I've never heard of Astrobot Academy, and I was researching while we were talking, and I can't find a single mention of it. So I think that's the one that snuck under the radar.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's mostly because of the way it was kind of marketed. But I'm surprised that there's absolutely no reference to it. I'm going to have to go back to my co-author and talk to him about it.
Maybe I missed it. This is just quick research while doing an interview, so
that's okay.
I might have missed it. But any chance you still have a copy of that?
Oh, boy. I'd have to dig and see. I may very well have that. But it probably is on disc, which, of course, is a real problem, even though...
No, that's not a problem.
Well, yeah, okay. If I do, I will contact you and let you know. Because I may have it on the 3.5-inch floppy kind of thing.
Right. Okay. Or more likely 5 1/4.
No, actually the smaller one.
Okay. You moved it since then, or did you?
No. We right towards the end, I had capability to put things on the smaller discs.
Oh, cool.
As I recall, and I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. I think that's because I had put it into the more advanced Atari, which used the smaller discs.
Oh, okay. As long as we're talking about digging in the basement or whatever, any chance you have any source code for any of your machine language games?
Boy, interesting that. really don't know right off whether I do or not.
If you find them.
I'll take a look when I get a chance.
Yeah, cool. Vaults of Zurich.
Oh, boy. I almost can't remember that one. Yeah, that one passes me by. Can you refresh my memory as to what the concept of the game was?
Okay, I found an ad for it, which actually doesn't say you wrote. I don't know. It says, where'd it go? Zurich is the banking capital of the world. The rich and powerful deposit their wealth in its famed impregnable vaults, but you, Master Thief, have dared to undertake the boldest heist of the century. You will journey down a maze of corridors and vaults, eluding the most sophisticated security system in the world. Your goal is to reach the chairman's chamber to steal the most treasured possession of all, the OPEC oil deeds.
I see. Not one that I did.
Really?
That I'm pretty sure was just an Artworx offering that I had no involvement with. Because that was also what, since what Art was doing was getting submissions from other authors that we would publish.
Oh, I see now. I think you ported this one to the Atari, so you probably didn't think too hard about it. Yeah. You did a player missile editor thing for making those sprites that you were talking about before.
Right. Yeah, and that was, it's a lot like DrawPick, where you see kind of a need. We didn't have a tool that would let us do that, that we could get our hands on, and as long as I was creating a tool, why not, kind of make it available.
Sure. Are there any other projects that you worked on, either published or unpublished, that we didn't talk about?
Yeah, there's one.
Okay. All right.
And it was at a point in time when, for the Atari 800, the storage media that you had was a Philips cassette. And you would record the program or whatever you were recording onto the Philips cassette. And it was sort of a digital audio-based recording on the cassette. And then you could obviously play the cassette back and reload it back into your computer. Mm-hmm. And at the time I was working with that storage system, was working on a program that a lot of kids play, which is, what do you call it? Basically, it's the battleship game where you have battleships and submarines and things like that. And I was working on submarines and having a con tower that you could look at and see ships floating on the sea, and then try to torpedo them and have a graphical action game of submarine and battleship kind of thing, where you would have things hitting you with the ships hitting you with what do you want, drums of explosive with, forget the name.
Mines or torpedoes or something?
Yeah, mines, thank you. Something like that. And so working on this, getting pretty far in the graphics and everything, and then because the cassette tapes were so unreliable, lost the whole darn thing. Didn't have a decent backup. When you thought you made a backup, you may have thought you did, but the backup was corrupt as well. And so it was kind of like, after, let's say, a month of working on this, you lose the whole darn thing. You got nothing. And I just didn't feel like starting over again. And it's like, okay, we'll move on to something else. And then, of course, the primary emphasis at that moment in time became, does somebody have not hard drives, but floppy drives that one can attach to the Atari? And there actually was someone that sold an independent drive system that you could hook up to the Atari. And that was, with 5 1/4-inch drive, was a godsend at that point in time. So that made life a whole lot different. But by then I was on to other things and working on other things, and never went back to that other program.
What haven't I asked you about that time that I should have?
That time? Well, there were a lot of sleepless nights. That certainly was part of that time. And but I'm sure that was true for almost anybody doing programming at that point in time. It's one of those things that And still for me to this day, programming is an important thing. And then it was so new and addictive for me. I was one who, although I might play video games, I so much rather create video games. So my whole mentality was the excitement of either graphics or just gameplay and creation of something new, as opposed to trying to get yet a higher score on an existing game that you could buy for the Atari, as opposed to even any other computer. So I was always interested in the creation aspect and the tools that would facilitate that, whether it's a compiler or a graphics creation program or whatever. Those kinds of things I found much more exciting and interesting than going and playing the games that other people created or even I created. So that was an interesting aspect of what was going on with me at that point in time. And strangely enough, have never sort of moved away from that whole part of things, other than ultimately winding up doing a lot of 3D design on computers for both Kodak and myself in my new company, which I'm now doing accessories for model trains. But as part of that, programming the microprocessors that are involved in all of that. So the programming aspect has never gone away from me.
Neat. All right, so my next question was going to be, what do you do today? So tell me a little bit about your model train business.
Well, while I was still working at Kodak, I had, of course, had model trains when I was a kid, way back when, and got Lionel toys for Christmas, sort of thing. And then not until much later in life, got back into it, and actually the kind of the thing that got me into it as our children were much older is my wife started collecting Department 56 and nutcrackers and things like that. And I think she felt bad that I wasn't doing anything like that. And she said, you like trains, why don't you take a look at that? And so I, of course, stopped into a train store and saw some of the new exciting trains and decided that was something I really did want to do. And of course, unfortunately, every one of my hobbies turns into a business. And so whether it's software or whether it's photography or whatever. And so I started building a train layout, or trying to, in the basement of our home, and had unhappy relationships with Lionel switches. And I wanted remote control switches, which were big and bulky at the time. And so I decided, well, I think I can do something better than that. And it turned out nearby, where we were living in Rochester, New York, there was a company that made track and switches for O-gauge trains, but they didn't have remote control switches. And since at the time working at Kodak, I was also at that point in time in part of camera design, where we would design cameras at Kodak and have them built in Taiwan. I was traveling to Taiwan and came up with a design for a switch machine to make the manual switch a remote control switch, and talked to the manufacturer there, which was Gargraves Trackage in North Rose, and said, gee, would you be interested in a switch machine if I made it so you could have your switches be remote control switches? And they thought that would be great, and it turned out another manufacturer in Connecticut doing the same thing for track and O-gauge trains, which is the Lionel trains. Talked to them at a train show, and they said, yeah, certainly. So I went off to Taiwan, talked to the guys there, and said, can you recommend somebody to make this product for me? Of course, being a customer of theirs as a Kodak person, they offered to make the thing for me, and that got me started into a simple electromechanical switch. But that became very popular, and so I started doing more and more products with microprocessors in them to control things. So got into crossing gates and trackside signals, all of which have microprocessors in them and all of which have been patented, which I'd gotten to be very used to doing that sort of thing at Kodak because I had 100 patents there. So it was something that I just never thought of not doing. I wouldn't do a product unless I thought I could do something special and unique and better in some way than what you might find in the marketplace. So since then, having finished at Kodak and retired, continuing to make and design new products first for O gauge and then HO and N, which a lot of people are more familiar with, and that sort of thing. So now we make those products, have some of them made in Taiwan still, get parts in circuit boards from China and things like that, and have assembly and testing, in many cases done here in the United States by people that I pay to do the assembly and testing. And then we market it through stores and distributors, and my daughter-in-law has a website that sells it direct and things like that. So can't seem to quit working. It's too much fun.
Excellent. I don't know much about model trains, but it just seems like stuff like Raspberry Pi and little gadgets like that would just open up the world to all sorts of fun tech gadgetry and wizardry that you could do.
Yeah.
On the
well,
model
the major
level.
manufacturers, Lionel and MTH, and a number of that would be the O gauge guys, have come up with remote controls for model trains, and the sound systems they've put in, with computer control for the speeds and blowing the whistle and uncoupling couplers all automatically, so you can run multiple trains on one track. Has that whole software part of and radio control of the trains has become a really big thing, and similarly for HO and even N, where the electronics has moved into that part of the model train business, and certainly from the engine and control standpoint, it's gotten pretty advanced and pretty neat, and in my view has made things a whole lot more fun, because you can run as many trains as you want on a single track, and compared to what you used to have to do, that's just a whole lot more fun, a whole lot easier.
Cool. Neat. If you could send a message to the people who are still playing with their Atari computers, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
I guess, from my standpoint, the whole thing is always to have fun. And if you're not having fun, you're doing something wrong. And, like when I have customers that have problems, again, if you're having a problem with something, like your Atari computer or loading a program, or whatever it is, get online, reach out, because there's probably somebody that can help you out. And if you spent 20 minutes of frustration, I always feel that's the point at which you need to stop, take a deep breath, and look for help. So that would be my best advice.
Great. Thank you, Dennis.
Okay. Thank you for calling.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.